29th of September. Right.
Sorry.
Well, good morning and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Powys Pension Board on the 29th of September 2023. And we will start with any apologies, please, Rachel.
Apologies from Nigel Bryn.
Thank you very much. So we are therefore quorate. And as this would have been Nigel's final appearance at the board before his well-deserved promotion to another authority, I'd like, I'm sure the board will support me in offering a vote of thanks to Nigel for his service on the board during his very, very busy period when he was under a lot of time pressure. So we're very grateful to Nigel, and I'm sure the board would back that that minute, please. Yes, hands up. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to item 2, declaration of interests. Are there any interests to declare, please? Oh, is Graham's hand up?
No, it's not happening.
Oh, right.
Nothing to declare.
All right. Okay. It's just I could see your hand up, Graham. No?
No.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We therefore move on to the minutes of the board held on the 12th of June 2023. And we're asked to authorise the chair to sign those as a correct record. And I think it was Ian and Graham who were present at that, along with myself. So does it look okay from your side?
Yeah, looks fine. Looks reflective of the meeting we had.
Okay. Thank you. Ian's not with us, is he?
Not as yet, Chair. No.
No. Okay. So thanks, Graham. So I shall therefore virtually sign those minutes as a correct record. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 4, matters arising from those minutes. And it seems to me there's nothing to mention that isn't elsewhere on today's agenda. However, should any member who perhaps wasn't there have any questions to ask, I think we'd happily try and answer those. Are there any questions? No? Okay, thank you. We therefore move on to item 5, the minutes of the Pension Investment Committee. They are present draft minutes, and the committee was held on the 7th of July 2023. I'd quickly talk you through what I regard as more important ones from our perspective. Note under item 4, the investment risk 007 will be updated as recommended by the board. There was at the committee considerable discussion on the various risks associated with climate change, resulting in the resolution shown in item 1. There was some very good documentation produced by Aon on what are climate-related risks. And I think if the board were to be doing any work on that, that would be a very useful starting point. And I think
something there, Chair. Sorry, can I add
yes,
something?
You're probably about to say what I'll say, but go on, Chris.
I don't want to steal your thunder at all. It's just to say the risk register that's in front of the board as a later item today does not include the item about climate change on the investment part of the risk register. However, since preparing these papers, I have done it with the intention that it's presented to committee at the meeting next Friday. The timings of these two meetings are too close together, unfortunately. So what I was proposing was that I share it with the board afterwards for comment, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's excellent, Chris. That's far quicker than I was anticipating. So well done, and thank you on that. But I was going to say basically that the fund will consider what the appropriate role for the board is on on this exercise. So that will be partly determined by the committee shortly.
Yeah, we'll see how the discussion goes next Friday. What committee think about that risk, and then I can involve board accordingly at that point, if that's okay.
Excellent, thank you. That's good progress. Item 6, the committee approved the administration strategy statement, which the board had previously scrutinised. The Appendix A referred to KPIs, and the approved format is proposed to be the basis of future reports to the board and the committee. Item 7, the overpayment policy. There will be more transparency regarding the implementation of the policy in the sense that there will be an annual report provided on how much has been, in effect, been written off, or any other relevant factors. Items 10 onwards were actually in the confidential section of the committee meeting. So I shan't talk about them at this stage. I think it was a very full, very intense committee meeting, and there was a considerable degree of engagement on it. So I think it was all good. Are there any comments on the draft minutes of the Pension Committee?
Chair,
David.
may I just ask a question, just very briefly? I mean, obviously, I think as a board, we're aware of the turmoil around longer term issues affecting investments due to inflation and potential changes in discount rates. I wondered, is the committee starting to acknowledge those risks?
Perhaps I can pick that one up, David.
Thank you.
Interestingly, there's a couple of papers going to committee next week. One looking at cash flows,
right?
In the short, medium, and long term, and a strategy review paper as well. So yes, it's been taken on board. I mean, as a fund, we're quite, as you remember, we're quite risk averse when it comes to these sorts of things with diversification and whatnot. But yeah, the timing felt right in terms of valuation outcome, and the way the market's been over the past 24 months or so, that it was right to review it. So yeah, there's a couple of papers going to committee next week, and hopefully we can share the minutes accordingly. You can see how those discussions went afterwards.
Thank you, Chris. That's really reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the question, David. It's I think it's jumped ahead of something that I was going to ask about later on in the agenda. So that again represents good progress. Okay. Subject to that discussion, we therefore note the draft minutes of the Pension Investment Committee held on the 7th of July 2023. And we now move on to the draft annual report of the Powis Pension Board, the 22-23, pages 19 to 26.
Would it be helpful if I shared my screen for everybody, or have you got it? It'd be helpful to share screen. Okay, I can see a couple of nods. So if yes, okay with you, Chair, I'll pop it on my screen. Yeah,
by all means. I've obviously got my copy printed here, as you'd expect. So.
Absolutely.
No problem. This was emailed out on the 5th of July as a prelude to today. And today we are asking that it's still in draft stage. So any further comments today can be taken on board, and the report can be amended. It will, of course, form part of the annual report of the pension fund itself. There were one or two minor figures to be included, including costs of running the board, etc. So it's the standard format. that I adopted in 2015, but each year it is gradually and modified as appropriate. So really, I'm here to answer any questions or any comments you may have.
Can I quickly add something, Chair? Apologies for jumping
Please.
in over the board. Just to make board aware that this is included in a draft version of the annual report, which is going to committee next week as well. So this version of the draft board report is included in that document, but obviously it's still subject to change. We have to publish the annual report by the 1st of December. So there is still time to make any amendments as we see fit. But just to make you aware, this version of the document is being presented to committee.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that.
Okay.
I don't think I need to talk you through it all. It's, as I say, a format that's gradually been tweaked over time. But I'm certainly here to answer any questions or observations or respond to any suggestions you may have as to content. It does tend to be one of the longer of the board reports among the 87 funds. I do plead guilty to that. But I think it's comprehensive and it does show what we're about. It was pleasing that we've ended up with a 67% attendance at boards in 22-23, albeit we have had one or two times when we've had to revise the date to ensure we were quorum.
I mean, if there's no comments from board members to say we have got time. Oh, David, sorry, your hand's gone up, David. Yep.
I echo your comments, Chair. Very comprehensive report, and I think it demonstrates the work that the board's been doing really well. And I know, from my view, from past experience, the value that can be added by the board doing its job properly. It just feels, based on my comments previously, that we probably need to just reflect on some of the things that we do going forward, depending on, as you mentioned, Chris, there's a couple of papers going to committee, coming to the next committee meeting next week, isn't it?
Yeah.
And whether or not that'll amend our work programme, I don't know, but certainly, just to conclude, Chair, I think it's a really comprehensive report, very, very helpful.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Yes, I'm just scribbling down. Regarding your comments about the papers going to committee, I think all boards need flexible work programs. You're absolutely right, and I think it really, in a way, tends to look after itself because we just sense and smell what could potentially be mega. And as indeed the committee, and we have the flexibility to include as appropriate, and we've also got the flexibility, as we did with the 3 pillars of the risk register. Should we want a short 1 hour max meeting focused on a particular topic, well, that can and has been arranged. So. I think we've got the tools and the opportunities as appropriate to both be reactive and proactive in terms of the work programme.
Yeah, and I think online meetings have really helped with that sort of short, snappy response time as well, Chair. So yeah. Just to comment on the risk register, it's been a real help to me in my role in providing this information back to committee. It was an opportunity to review the risk register in some depth, and it's really strengthened it, in my opinion, as well. So I do thank board for that one. It's really helped.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So all well and good with that, and so we can move on to item 7: pension regulators code of practice and updates with regards to compliance with TPR code of practice 14. Each meeting we review specific sections of Code of Practice 14, pending the long-awaited bringing into the law of the general code, formerly known as the single code, but that's still awaited. Chris, have you heard anything on?
I haven't, Chair, no.
Well, someone was at a presentation by the pension regulator to another public service scheme, and it's hard to get parliamentary time for laying of regulations. So it's very frustrating. It's had a very long gestation period. But Chris, would you like to talk us through the report you produced here on Code of Practice 14? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As you say, we're still awaiting the general Code of Practice, so we carry on with what's already in place until that comes along. So every quarter, I try and review the 3 or 4 oldest items. You'll see on the right-hand side there's a date, which I update every time I review it. So we're looking at the ones that were updated for September 23. And the first one that we looked at was publish information about the scheme. We tend to focus on what's the amber areas, which there is one in here, which, well, in the next item actually. So this was a light touch. A lot of information was in place, so I generally just tend to go through and update links and whatnot. We have a website which has a lot of information about the scheme and about who runs it, and on there is a section about the board with a link to the council's page on the board and the meetings, etc. So that, I think I'm comfortable that we do satisfy the published information about the scheme and particularly about the board and the committee, because we use the council's own web page to manage those with a link from the pension fund website. So the information is accessible from 2 points. And I've just updated the links on the right hand side to take people from this page straight through to the appropriate page on the Powys site. So it's very, very light touch when it came to the published information about the scheme. So unless there's any questions on that one, I'm happy to move on. I do apologise though, I've lost your faces and hands off screen. So if there are any questions, please just do shout out as we go. It's one of the things that happen when you're sharing a screen. So I can't see your hands go up, I'm afraid. So that was it for publishing information on the screen and the scheme. Happy to take any questions on it if there are any.
There was one that I didn't scribble down last night, Chris, about the reference to WPP. I just saw it as you were scrolling through. Can't see it.
This one, or is it under the next one, perhaps? Chair. No, I can't see it. Perhaps I've missed it. I can't see it in the first section about publishing information.
It was just to perhaps ask a question as to are you satisfied with things in place at WPP from the perspective of the impact on Powys? So I didn't pick that out last night, but maybe we can have a look through after, and you could perhaps just offer a written comment on that one.
No problem. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, are we happy for me to move on to providing information to members?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Again, because we've been through this several times now, it's a fairly light touch and just updating links and whatnot. The one with an amber in this area is to do with notification of deferred benefits to members who leave. There's a statutory requirement to do that within 3 months, and we've acknowledged that we're not able to hit that requirement for all deferred member calculations, and it's acknowledged on the breaches register, as you'll be aware. And the main reason for that is just a question around priority, really. Deferred benefits are those benefits which come into payment at some point in the future. So the focus for the administration team is to concentrate on paying those benefits which are payable immediately. So for example, somebody retires, the team will focus on paying benefits across those benefits to that member who's expecting them, rather than somebody who might be expecting the benefits in 20, 30 years potentially. So the focus is on paying the more immediate benefits, but we do acknowledge that there's a breach of the regulations in terms of the deferred notification within 3 months. However, we have set up an interim letter, which was discussed at board previously. So for those people who leave and are not entitled to immediate payment of pension benefits, we do write to them and acknowledge the fact that we've been notified by the employer that we've been told they've left, and we give a high-level information guide, basically to say if you're under 2 years and you haven't transferred in, you'll get a refund. We'll contact you about that. If you're over 2 years or less than 2 years and have transferred in some benefits, you'll get a deferred benefit. We'll write to you about that. And it just outlines the process of what we'll follow to notify these individuals. So we do correspond within the 3 months, but it's not necessarily always providing them the information of their deferred benefit amounts. So we acknowledge that that's technically a breach of regulations, which is why it's identified on the breaches register. And I should point out this is not unique to Powys either. This is an LGPS issue, simply to do with the number of starters and leavers that we see come through the LGPS. We have to prioritise those that need the immediate payments. So that's what the amber category there is covering. It's just an acknowledgement that we do write to people, and we follow that up later with the actual information about that individual benefits. I think it needs to stay amber because we are acknowledging that there's more work to be done on it, essentially.
I would very much support it staying amber, and colleagues in agreement with that? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. You fully explained why this is not a priority. That's fully understood. Can you see any light at the end of the tunnel, Chris?
I can. We the complexity around this is the final salary nature of the scheme. That's more detailed. It's much more complicated than the new career average. We are in a much better place when it comes to career average deferred benefits now. We had a restructure of the team a couple of years ago, and one of the benefits from that is that we are actually able to do this for those who are career average only. So for those who've joined the scheme since 2014, have no final salary benefits at all, we can do this. The team are now trained and up to speed to be able to do this. So I'm confident that somebody who only came into the care scheme and leaves in the care scheme will get their benefits within the appropriate timescales. The complexity is around those longer standing ones that have final salary linkage. That's more complicated and takes more time. So there's definitely been some progress in terms of turning this around quicker for the more simple ones. The more complicated cases require a bit more time, and that's where we're still falling short a little bit on that. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we are trying to process these as quickly as we can. We've had a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah, so go on, Chris.
We've had an issue more recently. In fact, we've had a turnover of staff, which hasn't helped the situation because we've lost some experience of the final salary scheme. So there's a case of rebuilding that up with the replacement, retraining and whatnot. But in terms of care only, a lot of progress has been made, and I'm satisfied on that front.
I see. Well, that, I think, answers the question I was going to put. It's the loss of expertise in final salary,
yes,
rather than, or perhaps combined with some complexities in terms of the method of calculation.
Absolutely. I was discussing this morning with the pensions administration manager. Actually, we're a team of 14 now, so we have grown over time. But there's only 3 of us currently, with 1 member off sick. So 4 out of the 14 that were here when the final salary scheme was in place.
Wow. So
there's only the 4 of us who were living and breathing this 10 years ago or 9 years ago when the care scheme came in. So that's the issue. And it's important for me to say, we're not unique in this case. A lot of the pension sections within the LGPS will see this. It's just as we move further away from the final salary scheme, by its nature, the experience of actually being around during that time is moving on with that as well. So that's the issues we're coming up against.
Yeah. So as you say, all funds will be in a similar situation. But as one looks at the impending retirement of colleagues across the whole LGPS in pensions admin, to state the obvious, sort of passing on the knowledge to successors seems more important in this particular situation.
Yeah, definitely.
More than generally. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So presumably, training documentation is there, or
Yep.
is it verbal or?
No, we have created a pension administration manual. And
Right.
it's a working document which is designed to try and help with training and act as a guide, a manual for team members to be able to access. So should one of the people who might know more about final salary not be available, for example, there is an administration guide that they're able to go to, and that's being updated all the time.
Yeah.
For example, it's recently been updated about McLeod, which has a final salary linkage.
Yeah.
So what we're going to see is that as we start working more and more on McLeod, it's vital that the rest of the team are able to understand and calculate final salary benefits. They can, don't get me wrong, but it is more complicated than the care only part of the scheme. Yeah.
So from the board's perspective, Chris, you're giving us assurances that we are future-proofed in terms of continuing knowledge and awareness of what's involved.
Yes, we
with final salary.
Yeah, all of our team members have or are working on the CIPP pensions qualification. So it's not just the internal training. All our team members, once they complete the training, will have at least one layer of the professional qualification as well. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It is a tricky one. It is complex, and the LGPS is getting more complex by the day, it feels, as well. So it's an important one we are aware of, and we are throwing a lot of resource at training, which we'll come on to later on as one of the later items. But yeah, it's an issue LGPS wide.
Yeah, I think I'd like to pick some of the macro issues up, as it were, when we get onto that item.
Yeah.
Well, that's helpful. So we as a board are agreed it stays amber. Yes, thank you.
Okay, again, just moving on from that. A few of these are basically just statements of fact, and we have procedures in place where we need to. So I have no other concerns around providing information to members. It's really around that the deferred benefits issue that the LGPS is seeing, and we're seeing that as well.
So I think are we happy? The minute reads something along the lines of the board were satisfied with the assurances given regarding the ongoing ability to deal with final salary issues, or some words on those lines that Chris will be able to tweak far better than we can.
Yeah. So, Chair, we can also say and note the steps being taken. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, David, to add that to the minute if
Chris,
we can.
Is obviously being proactive about this, and I think that needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So is that okay, Chris?
It is. Yeah, as I'm scrolling through, Chair, I just noticed there's one other amber item.
Oh, sorry. There you go. 209.
It's my fault. Yeah. Apologies. It's just about the members where we've lost contact with. We call them gone away members, i.e., we've tried to contact them, and for example, a letter's been returned. We use a facility to try and trace members. Now, some funds do this on a bulk basis, perhaps annually. I mean, maybe less frequent, but we try and do it on a more individual basis. So where we have a member who's gone away, we have access to a system. Sorry, it's not me that does this. I can't remember the name of the system. Where we try and locate individuals on a more frequent basis. So we are on top of trying to get a hold of gone away members as well. We do have a process in place to try and do that. However, it's noted as amber because we do have some records where we're not able to trace people.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. In my experience in other places, some funds do a review, say annually or something, as opposed to a tick over type approach.
Yeah.
Do we do the same?
We don't do an annual one at this point in time. I think the decision was taken by the admin team that because we've got a smaller fund, obviously we have smaller numbers than some of the other larger funds, that it made sense for us to try and do it on an ad hoc basis. We could look at doing something more or less frequent, but I think pretty satisfied that the process we have in place is as much as we can do at this point in time.
Right. Okay. I think the funds I've been involved in do use an external facility
Yes.
when doing it annually. As you say, the size of our fund suggests an ad hoc basis, probably as good as any.
We did look into the costs. I don't think that the difference between the costs was not significant, really. I don't think, because we're not able to scale it up to see the benefits of economies of scale. So that's the approach we're taking. And I think until the admin team come and tell me that it becomes an issue, I think that's probably the approach we're going to continue to take.
So from your perspective, Chris, it sounds as if you're agreeing it continues as amber.
Yes.
And the board happy with that? Yes, nodding. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. I was just going to note that obviously Chris is and the team are keeping on keeping numbers manageable, and I guess if it gets to a point where, as long as those numbers are being monitored in terms of there's no spike or significant increase, then that's the point, I guess, at which it might need to be reviewed, isn't it?
You make a very valuable point there, Graham, in terms of numbers. And at some stage, perhaps when this comes back to us, it might be helpful to have a look at just how many are involved, how many were involved. Is there a trend?
Yeah, I can provide those next time. No
I think it would just add a bit of colour to our discussions, maybe.
There is one other. Yes, that's fine. I'll bring those to the next board. That's no problem. I don't know the numbers for this one, I'm afraid. I would have to do that.
Oh yeah, indeed.
There is a follow-on to this, which actually leads to one of the other breaches, which is payments, which we can cover on the breaches register, but where people have gone away, sometimes we're unable to pay refunds to them.
Yeah.
Which takes us over the 5-year refund period within the legislation. So it does have a knock-on effect in terms of sometimes we're not able to trace these people and pay refunds. And we do acknowledge that on the breaches register as well.
Yeah, indeed. There's a bit of a catch-22, really.
Yeah.
Or a catch-208, forgive the pun. Right, okay. In terms of resolving issues, all green.
Yes.
Wonder whether anything, despite them being green, it needs to be pointed out at this stage.
Perhaps if I can just add a bit of context as to why we've got it all as green. Essentially, this is to do with the fact that there is a resolution process within the LGPS itself. It's a 2-stage internal dispute resolution process. We have a policy in place to help scheme members when it comes to resolving disputes. We have a complaints and a compliments policy separate to that. And we do provide detail within letters where the fund have made a decision, for example, what a scheme member can do in terms of if they're not happy with that decision and whatnot. So we do try and include in the appropriate letters the details on what to do next if there are any complaints or any issues that a member has. So I'm comfortable that we do have the processes and procedures in place to help scheme members resolve issues based around the framework that's provided within the actual LGPS regulations. So that's why I've got them as green, but I'm happy to take any questions or any discussions on it. That's board see fit.
In the light of I'm not certain if it was a compliments and complaints policy or the other way around, but I remember those discussions, and you're clearly showing there, Chris, the fact that it's the stages 1 and 2 of IDRP are internal.
Yeah.
But you did, following the request from the board, research Wales, other Wales funds, and you say it tends to be a common approach in Wales.
It is, and I know where you're coming from with this, Chair, because we do know that there are other funds that use an external third party, let's say, to review these cases. As you say, the key word for us is that it is an internal disputes resolution procedure. And we do try and have people involved in the reviews that weren't actually necessarily directly involved in the cases themselves. So yeah, we have some comfort, and it is a general approach in Wales that we follow the same process.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments, colleagues, on what we're looking at? I just wonder, on the sort of same basis as we've just discussed about numbers, whether from time to time it's worth the board just reflecting on any activity within the complaints and compliments policy. How active is it? Are there any issues being raised that perhaps may have an interest to the board?
I do try, and we've got an item on the agenda about internal disputes,
Yeah.
IDRP cases. So I do try and bring the ones that I think board need to know
Yeah.
about to the board. And we're very
Yeah.
fortunate in that we don't get that many,
Yeah.
which is good. But I guess my answer to that one is, if I felt anything needed to come to the board, I would bring it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just a comment really in a report out, because we got IDRP, as you say, as a specific item, which is basically mentioned in Code of Practice 14 anyway. And we always see that. But I was just thinking of the next box, which is the compliments and complaints which don't make it to IDRP, just to get an idea as to are we getting compliments, for example? Are there any complaints that perhaps aren't IDRP but we could learn from?
We do keep a compliments register. We get them from time to time. And in terms of complaints, we don't really get many at this stage, I'm pleased to say.
That's good,
which I think is hopefully a good sign that we're doing things in the right way for the scheme members. I can look into the numbers, but I don't think you're going to see too many, to be honest.
No. What you've told us there, Chris, seems to me to justify including in the minute of this item a comment on the fact that very few complaints are received. I think that is valuable knowledge, and it's worth putting out there as well. Are board happy with that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly, if from John's perspective, he would, if his members were upset with processes or whatever, we've also got that. I'll say informal stroke formal link in as well as the formal policy. So if it is looking good, I think it merits a sentence in the minutes to that effect. And I hope I haven't put the commentator's curse on it. Okay, well, thank you. That was very, very good. So we're happy to move on to pages 43 to 44, the operational and admin report and updates.
There is one more item, actually, sorry, Chair, which is, again, is all green, and that's reporting breaches of the law. I mean, perhaps we can pick this up as part of the breaches register, if you like, because there has been a slight tweak to that.
Sorry, yeah, I'd scribble that, discuss later. Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah,
and I hadn't said that. Thank you. We will discuss under the breaches if colleagues are comfortable with that. Okay, so assuming now we've got to number 8. Chris, do you want to just briefly talk us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Board will be familiar with this report. It appears at every board meeting. So just an update on the cash flow over the period, 1st of June to 31st of August 2023. Nothing in those which is very different from the norm. So those are presented for your information. As usual, as I say, please shout out if there are any questions as we go, if that's okay, these colleagues. The usual information on the scheme membership profile. And you can see we are a maturing scheme as our numbers of deferreds and pensioners grow. Status number 4 means deferred members. Number 5 is pensioner records. Number 6 is dependent records. And number 9 is frozen refunds, so refunds that are waiting to be paid. And number 1 is our active membership records. So just a membership profile of you there. And over time, we're going to see 4, 5, and 6 grow, and 1 probably stay constant or reduce. I think the numbers over time have gradually reduced, as we've seen across the LGPS, as councils have been reducing their workforce slightly, which has obviously meant a natural flow into deferred and pensioner statuses over time. But the LGPS itself is maturing, so that's where we're seeing that as well locally. User information on the 50/50 scheme membership. Numbers are quite low, and they don't change very much, to be honest. And the current number of active participating employers is 22, and that's been added as a request that the board made a couple of meetings ago as well. So just the general information on the statistics for board. That was it. I'm happy to take any questions on that one.
I've got a couple of questions, Chris, but I'd like to open it up to colleagues first if they have any observations, any questions or any comments.
Chair, if I can, it's a really helpful snapshot, but I just wondered, Chris, if you could, what I'm getting a sense of is a steady state. I mean, do you, if there's an opportunity to tell us when you present this, if anything's changed or there is a trend moving in a certain way, that might be helpful. But that's my only observation, but it's a really good snapshot of the current position. I guess where I'm coming from is over a period of time, it's the strain on cash flow, which we obviously need to pick up at some stage. But that's my only comment. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David. You've obviously been looking at my notes here.
No, definitely not.
I was going to pick up the issue of trend in the sense that in terms of the macroeconomic situation, socio-economic situation we're in the UK, the squeeze on family finances, I'd half anticipated some increasing popularity for the 50/50 scheme. So I had a look back at what the numbers were in March 22 and
they may be exactly the same.
Active 18, you're right, Chris, and then 18 again.
Yeah.
Deferred 6 and they're now 9, and there was one frozen refund at that stage.
Yeah.
So I was in a way almost disappointed, but I think in terms of linking to David's point as well, the one thing we're missing in a way is whether any are moving out of active, not because they have become deferred or pensioners, but because they, and I know we can't ask them this question specifically as a right, and they certainly don't need to respond, but I think the general feeling at SAB is that they would hope that people don't feel they have to give up their membership, because they're squeezed by mortgages and etc., cost of living. So
this has been run through my mind, for a long time. I was expecting to see these numbers increase, but there's been very little appetite really for 50/50 membership. Now, what I haven't got here is I haven't got the number of opt-outs, for example, which would be something that you'd probably be interested in.
Yeah, that's the next piece of the jigsaw, isn't it?
Yeah. That's something I can look at for you for next time. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. And also, as David pointed out, I'm going to come back in a later item to the cash flow issue you pointed out there, David, in that the net outflow on this report for January to March was 926,000, which, for a fund of Powis' size is beginning to feel material. So when we look at the risk review, and cash flow forecasts in place and in governance 002, I'll refer back to the information we've got in this report then.
Mm.
And I think that, David, that'll probably link into your observation as well.
Yeah, it will, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks for that, Chris. It's like many things; they can always be tweaked a little bit,
Oh,
but
yes.
as long as they don't get over complex to administer and to produce, we
That's
want to get the
fine.
balance right, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So we now move on to the item 9, legislation and governance update, pages 45 to 50. And the board is asked to note reports, and there is a lot in this report.
There is. So I hadn't intended to go through bullet point by bullet point. I was intending really just pull out the interesting and important information that the board needs to be aware of, if that's okay. But please do stop me as I'm going if you have any questions and whatnot. So I think the first item of interest is 2.2, which is the Scheme Advisory Board annual report up to 31st of March 2022. So that's 18 months out of date now, but it's the last set of full annual report information that they have. And again, it's showing the general trends within the LGPS, that the membership has increased up to 6.39 million members at the end of March 2022. So it's a lot of people that we administer the LGPS to. Assets have increased as well by nearly 8% over the 12 months up to 2022. Again, showing that the LGPS is growing, both in terms of numbers and in terms of assets under management. Bullet point 3 has got some information about the investment returns over the 21-22 year. And I think the cash flow is coming up quite a lot. Bullet point 4 there, is it 4? Yeah, it's come up quite a lot already this morning. It's about the cash flow situation. There's an important part included within the brackets there. Many of the funds, as you've seen in the previous item, when it comes to administration only, there might be cash flow negative, but because of the investment returns, it is keeping the fund cash flow positive, which is where we find the Powis Fund. However, you'll note my previous comment about a paper going to committee next week, which goes into this a bit more detail.
Right. Okay.
But again, we're in the same position as a lot of LGPS funds out there in terms of our maturity and whatnot. We are cash flow positive when you include the investment returns, as it is as a scheme as a whole. Nearly 2 million pensioners are being paid by the LGPS. So again, a lot of important and good work being done by the LGPS when it comes to paying our pensioners. An interesting one here, the last bullet point about how the manager charges increased by 22% over that period as well. Now, I attended the cost transparency training that the Scheme Advisory Board put on actually earlier this week, and I think the chair of the board, I think you've been to one, a separate session as well, where cost transparency was discussed and is being looked at. It's important to remember that a lot of the manager fees are paid on a percentage basis. So as the assets under management go up, the fees you pay for that go up as well. It's only part of the picture, but that's one thing to point out when you see such a large increase in manager costs and manager charges. Part of that is due to the fact that we now having more assets managed as well. But nevertheless, that's quite a significant increase. And I think one of the questions at the cost transparency workshop was around, do people know how much investment management charges have gone up? And I was the only one that got it right in the room because I just prepared this report, actually. So I think it did surprise people that it's gone up quite so much, so it needs looking at. So I think it's fair to say there'll be some more work going on looking at costs around investment management charges and whatnot. Important to say, as a fund, we're now a member of the Wales Pension Partnership, and they've done a great job in being able to provide various asset classes for us at a cheaper rate than we would have been paying on our own. Simply, we've touched on it before about economies of scale. By the Powis Fund being a member of the WPP, we have been able to benefit from economies of scale. So we really have saved on our investment manager fees. However, we're going to be looking at it a bit more closely as the Scheme Advisory Board wants us to do as part of the cost transparency exercise as well. I don't know if you wanted to add any more that Chair, I was going to leave it at that for this bullet point, if that's okay. But it's just to say work is ongoing at a national level, looking at this as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. As you say, a lot of the increase in cost is ad valorem. Also, a lot is because of the higher costs of access to the more sophisticated, illiquid private markets. But the scheme, the chair of SAB was obviously due to be at this meeting had we been able to have gone with the 11th of September date as originally scheduled. And so Chris and I had more or less planned that this item would be included in the September report. SAB is very keen that this macro vision is shared at all pension boards and committees. So there it is in front of us for today. The cost transparency training that I went to was in Wolverhampton, so that was primarily driven by the central pool, and it's nice in a way that we get different perspectives, but the fundamental issues are identical, as Chris has set out. So that's all from me on that aspect.
Yeah, I expect we'll see more about this over time as we start looking at it in a bit more detail. So
yeah.
Okay. Another thing that the Scheme Advisory Board are doing, which is quite helpful actually, is they're looking at the guidance on that SIPF have produced on producing the annual report. As board will be aware, the annual report is a pretty hefty document. So the Scheme Advisory Board are looking to fill that void that might be there as a result of SIPF finishing with their pension pension panel. That's the one I'm looking for. Thank you, Chair. So Scheme Advisory Board are looking at whether they can step into that sort of space that's been left, and one of the things they're looking at is the guidance on the annual report, which will be helpful. But until then, we're still operating based on the SIPF guidance that was produced for us. So this is quite a lot of the report should include this. The report must include this, and those sorts of terminologies. They're looking at whether they can sort of consolidate that to try and make the production of the report a bit simpler for administering authorities, because it is quite a resource intensive process to go through. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. So I'm awaiting that one with bated breath really to see what they come up with. I think moving on now to 2.5, I think that's an important one. The valuation report. Obviously, we went through the valuation as at March 22, as did the rest of the LGPS. So the Scheme Advisory Board have pulled together the overall scheme valuation report, and some of the highlights are as per those bullet points. Pleasing to see the average funding level has improved from 98% up to 107% for the LGPS. And all the funds have shown an improvement since 2019, as we did at the Powis fund level as well. We're up to just about 100% funded now, which is really pleasing. The average contribution rate to meet future service costs rose. It's quoting from 18.6 to 19.8%, which again supports what we saw at a local level. The cost of providing future benefits is costing more. However, because the funders moved to a better funding position, any deficit contributions that some employers may have seen may now have gone, because they themselves find themselves 100% funding, so not paying any catch-up contributions. But the future cost is increasing slightly, as we can see there. Oh, and again, and bullet point 3 kind of goes into that point, that the overall contribution rate for the LGPS fell simply because the deficits for a lot of employers have now gone because of the improvement in the funding levels. So whilst the future costs are going up, the past service costs are reduced because of the improvement in the funding level between the valuation periods. And then perhaps more importantly for scheme members is that the average contribution rate has increased slightly from 6.5 to 6.6%. So hopefully that's a useful bit of information for board there. Happy to take any questions. But I've literally taken that from the Scheme Advisory Board update.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Happy to move on. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. 3.1, very, very quickly going to touch on this, but essentially there was some consultation put out there by DLUC on pooling and levelling up, really. I'm pulling together a response for the Powys Fund, noting that the consultation closes on the 2nd of October, so Monday. So I'm up against it to get this produced. However, I have started on it, and we're trying to produce a report that's consistent across Wales, because this is looking at pooling essentially. And obviously Wales, as the Wales Pension Partnership, has its own identity and its own beliefs and benefits and whatnot. So it's important that when we submit these responses as individual funds, that we're consistent in our message. So that is going to be the case, and the pool will be issuing their own response as well. So leave that one with me. I'm hoping to try and get that finished today, and I'll try and share it with board and committee as soon as I can for any comments and whatnot. But in the general feeling behind it is that we were supportive of how the WPP will be responding, as in, we think it's working within Wales. Please can you let us continue doing what we've been building on for the past 5 years, because these are all the benefits of having done that. So close on the 2nd of October, the fund will submit a response by that date.
Well, thanks, Chris. Just briefly, I was invited to contribute to an article in the IPE magazine on this, and I felt I could only focus on the governance aspects of it. I shared those with the fund before I submitted them to the author of the article, but I was basically pointing out that some pools, including WPP, are already established an effective, unified, highly motivating, clear and proud identity and ownership, which could be lost if force-fitted into another pool. I was also concerned about the danger that merged joint governance committees would no longer find room for all partner funds to be represented, that could present a democratic deficiency, or the joint governance committees could be too unwieldy in size, and on other points on that. Now, Chris had those from me, and may or may not have been able to pass them on to WPP in case they wanted to endorse them. It's a little bit more in your face, really, in those pools that have been set up as operators, because the funds fundamentally own the pools. We are advised, or we're advised is the word, I think, that DLU, the department, is in fact talking directly to pools, which I find a little bit concerning because of the fact that the pools are owned by their funds. So there will be some interesting submissions coming up, I'd suggest.
I think there will, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
And good luck with your timescale.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a busy couple of weeks trying to prepare for this meeting and the committee meeting and the joint governance committee we've had for the Wales Pension Partnership.
I'm sorry you'll miss the Ryder Cup, but there you go.
No, needs must. I can listen to it on the radio, I suppose, whilst I'm working on it. So 3.2 is McLeod. So the McLeod legislation has been laid and takes effect from the 1st of October. So from Sunday, the team will be doing the McLeod check for all those immediate retirees. Essentially, that means that they'll be doing a check against final salary and the care benefits, and pay the better of the two to the scheme members for those cases that are applicable to. So there's a team meeting this afternoon just to go through the fact that we'll be switching this on within the system on Monday. So the team are prepared and aware of what needs to be done and what they'll see on screen when this happens. In terms of McLeod, I've been talking about it for a long time. It feels very real now it's here. And we're going to be doing a bit of work just to make sure that we feel as though we're adequately resourced to deal with this. Because essentially it means an additional calculation will need to be performed at each retirement or each transfer. And it comes back to the final salary conversation we had earlier on, because it's checking the difference between the care scheme and the final salary scheme. But it also does mean that in terms of existing scheme members, we'll have to go back through, or when I say we, the Pensions Administration team will have to go back through and input hours and pay information for the members caught up within this, or caught by this remedy, just to ensure that when benefits are paid, that the scheme members receive the better of either situation. Additional complexity are around any benefits that we've already paid in the intervening period. We'll have to go back and revisit all those calculations and perform the check. Another layer of complexity added to that are, what about if somebody's transferred in some previous LGPS benefits and haven't given us the hours and pay information? We're going to have to go back to the previous authority and say, oh, by the way, for this transfer you paid us 6 years ago, we noticed there's some final salary information, hours information needed. Can you give it to us, please? And likewise, we'll be contacted by funds asking for that information as well. So it's starting to hit home now, in fact, that this is going to be an additional layer of complexity added to it, and why we need to make sure we've got our team up to speed and the resource in place to be able to deal with it. So more work is going to be ongoing with that. However, we are working on the data collection with our employers, and we have already started and have some data in for some of our smaller employers. Obviously, Powys being the biggest employer within the fund is the one that we need to make sure we get right. So we're working on that with Powys as well. So that's the update. It's live from Sunday, and we're working on it.
Yeah, Chris, thanks. Yeah, you've got some deadlines coming up, 1st October, 2nd October.
Yeah.
The inevitable question really is, can the board be assured that Powys is fully prepared and should be implementing the new regs in a timely manner?
Well, we knew this was coming. This is not a surprise. And board will be aware that we grew the team by 5 back in 2020 in readiness for this. I think the reality is that the scheme in itself has got more and more complicated. So I guess to offer board the assurances, we did grow the team. We're just reviewing it now to make sure whether we've got that number right, I guess is the underlining point to take from this. So I'm looking at it basically. So there's some work to be done. If we feel we haven't got it right, then there'll be some additional requests for resource going to committee before too long, essentially.
Okay.
So we're in the middle of it right now.
Okay, thanks. Any comments, colleagues? David, your hand up.
So are you inviting comments about anything before the McLeod discussion or anything at all?
Oh, sorry, by all means, if I've gone too fast, yes.
No, you haven't at all, Chair. No, I'll leave those to the end if Chris wanted to run through. I'll leave it with you, Chris.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, the rest is just updates of information, really. I think those are probably the key ones, really, for this report. I just try and keep board updated in what's come out of the bulletins, really. So the rest of it is just for information only. So I'm happy to take any comments or any questions you have now, David.
David, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to go back. The bit that pulled me up a little bit was earlier in the report where you gave the financial the fees summary, Chris.
Yes.
So it's gone up by 22.5% from, and if I'm reading this right, 1.7 billion.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's over £2 billion of fees that have been earned from local government pension funds.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, as the chair said clearly, and you said, it's clearly a function of the way that fees are calculated. However, that's a really a sort of arresting figure, isn't it? It's a real, for me, it did stop me short when I read the papers. And it's great that, you know, you gave the range of 98 to 107% in funding levels, and that's the assurance that we need. But the question, I suppose, is, Chris, and I didn't see anything in here, where's the benefit from pooling shown?
Probably in the annual report's a better place than this
Is
one,
it?
David,
So
actually.
it'll be in there.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't a criticism of your report, Chris, by any means. No. I suppose the question, I put it rather clumsily, is, you know, is the benefit of pooling being adequately captured? Because you know, the Wales Pension Partnership, you know, I think it's probably one of the more, from what I can see, my limited knowledge, I suppose, of what happens elsewhere, it seems to be working fairly well. Now, you know, I'm out of date, obviously, with how it's working, but it all comes back to that position around, you know, 1.7 billion has increased by 22.5%. And I'll be perfectly blunt. I mean, you have to question how difficult some of the investment stuff that happens is.
Yeah.
It just seems to be a hell of a financial burden, doesn't it? And does that feature as a very active discussion in terms of value for money for running the pension funds? I don't know, Gerard, perhaps you might be, nationally I'm talking about, you might be better placed to answer that.
There is obviously a lot of focus, David, on the point you're making about where are the savings, and the government is, in my opinion, and what I've heard people say, is very focused on driving down costs, and this goes very much back to the heart of why the government's put the investment pooling proposals on the table. What we don't see in this is what the fees would have been, but for the savings that have been made by pooling. So this is very much a net overview. So there's almost a gross and a notional saving element to it. As we've indicated, some of the private markets are funds, are assets and risk parameters that Powys would not otherwise on its own would have been able to access.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the overall asset liability strategy and avoiding concentration risk in any one asset class, obviously the diversification costs the diversification advantages are great to Powys, but they do come at a cost.
Absolutely. It's a very, very complicated picture when you start digging into it, actually, and then the cost is only one element of it. I was quite pleased that in the Scheme Advisory Board presentation, actually, earlier in the week, they did acknowledge the keyword risk. It isn't just about paying the least. It's about paying what you're comfortable with in return, in respect of risk and return as well. And they did acknowledge that, and I was very pleased to see that as well. But then, Chair, you're absolutely right. As the government want funds to start investing in more private markets, that's part of the proposal. It costs more as well. So it's very complicated. So I'm pleased that this work is going to be undertaken on looking at it, because, as David says, this figure is enormous. And it is worth making sure, and it is important to make sure that we are getting the right value for money. As well.
And if I could do a bit of unexpected joined up writing here, Chris, the one thing that almost frightened me when I went to the SAB presentation, was the sheer time demands of collecting this information and reporting this information. Notwithstanding the fact that common reports are trying to be generated, etc. But it seems to me a huge additional burden on funds.
I completely agree.
In terms of resources. And we've just previously been talking about McLeod and the need to review the level of staffing as we are, once we're in at the deep end from the 1st of October. And I think the sheer increase in the admin challenges have been there, not just driven by McLeod, but various other things. But on the investment side, there are similar additional workload demands coming in through complex legislation and guidance. And I wouldn't underestimate the potential impact on a fund such as Powys. For its size, it has exactly the same legal requirements for reporting as the metropolitan funds, for example.
It does.
So, so from your personal perspective, as it were, it puts a lot more pressure on your shoulders, which the board would readily acknowledge. And I think it would be right for the board just to sort of flag up a warning sign on the impact on, you and Dan, etc.
Yeah.
Because it's not a very big base of resource there.
No, and as we're talking, it feels like there's an element of key person risk here as well. If Dan or I were not available for whatever reason, then the Powers Fund would be in a very sticky situation.
And that's what I'm basically getting at. It's key person risk, but plus overall resource risk.
Yeah,
it's the double squeeze. I'd suggest.
I agree. There was almost a collective, not groan, it's the wrong choice of word, sigh in the room when this discussion was happening at the Scheme Advisory Board, because all the officers were thinking, there's something else we've got to do. We know we've got TCFD coming. That's a task force for climate financial rated disclosures reporting. That's going to be a requirement at the end of next year. We've got this cost transparency exercise, all for the right reasons, but it is additional requirements being placed on the relevant people at the funds. So yeah, it is noted, and it was noted within the room as well.
Yeah, yes, I mean, I won't use the term cry for help, but you know what I mean, Chris. It's an awful lot of pressure on a very few people. Yeah. And I think the board should really be flagging that potential impact up, that increasing key person risk as you defined there.
Am I
over worried, worrying about this, colleagues, or do you think it's a valid observation to put in the minutes?
I think it's valid, Chair. The pressure, the increasing changes and pace of change around the environment in which the LGPS operates is going to put, I think, quite a lot of pressure on the relatively small teams, which are already doing an awful lot. And I think we need to note that, and also we need to make sure that we flag up any issues to the pension committee as we see fit.
Yeah. Well, as you know, David, I do an exec summary back to committee. Absolutely. So I do have that vehicle at my disposal.
Yeah.
So I will, as we're obviously unanimous in this, I will flag this issue up.
It's fine, Chair. Whilst you're making notes, Chair, is it okay if I just have a 2-minute comfort break, if that's okay?
I was just about to suggest that as soon as we finish this item.
Okay.
As I think we've now finished this item.
We have, unless there are any more questions. Yes, that's it from
me. I will see you in 2 minutes, and we'll all catch up on where we are at the Ryder Cup.
Oh, yes.
Are we all back? Right. Thank you. Returning. So we now move on to the review of the risk register, item 10, pages 51 to 70. So we've done the in-depth review of the 3 pillars: admin, governance, and investments. And so this is back to the full register. But we're also to consider any new risks that aren't reflected. So we can't go through every single part of this. But what I would suggest, if colleagues have any particular risk that they would like to speak on, we handle it that way, rather than trying to review absolutely every bit that's in front of us. Does that sound fair, Chris?
I'm happy with that, Gerard. Yeah, that makes.
Unless you had an alternative proposal to introduce.
No, the only thing that I really wanted to cover was you have seen this in some depth over the past 12 months or so. Nothing has changed apart from the tidying up of the wording that we've discussed previously and the strengthening of the controls and things. This is all the risk registers in one place. The one item we've briefly touched on it earlier on is to do with the climate change and responsible investment risk. As I say, I have added that as a new risk for the investment pillar.
Yep.
That's going to be a risk 12 on the investment register, I think. So apologies for not being able to get it to board in readiness for this meeting. I will share it after the meeting. So I guess I would just ask for any comments that you might have if you get the chance before the next committee meeting, so I can consider that when we have the discussion at committee. But previously, climate change and responsible investment was acknowledged as a risk within the responsible investment policy. But I think as committee rightly raised at the last meeting, it should probably sit on the risk register. So it's now been done. So I'll circulate the wording and for you to have a look at after the meeting. That was the only thing I wanted to raise on this one.
Okay, thanks, Chris. If I could start off, sorry. First of all, any colleagues, please shout or raise your hands if there are any specific ones you'd like to address. David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chris, the investment risk, I think 0010, the government bonds one. I've noticed, obviously, with some of the movements in the markets around bonds recently, is this something that we are, I suppose, is the best term I can use, hedging, probably the wrong term with bonds, but are we addressing it in the investments the policy? Is it adequately covered? Because obviously there's been some movements around that lately.
Yes, I'm going to have to defer the answer on that one, David. It is going. There's a strategy paper, as I say, going to committee next week.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're heavily reliant on the advice we get from our investment consultants at Powis because we don't have the knowledge within house when it comes to strategy. Just to give board some assurances, I keep getting assured by Aon that the strategy we've got in place is doing what it sets out to do.
Right.
And the bond market, I think, has picked up a little bit actually recently. And I think that probably one of the things to consider is whether we've got it allocated correctly in terms of the spread of the percentages.
I agree.
So if I can defer the answer on that one until I've seen what committee come up with, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course it is. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Okay. Any other particular risks people want to point out? No.
I guess the one comment is that we have none. If you look at the heat maps, after all the mitigations, we have none that are sat in any of these scary areas that are up in the top right.
Yeah.
So after our review, we should take some comfort in the fact that we are comfortable in the fact that we have mitigations in place which try and avoid any of these severe catastrophic events.
Yes, it's one of those tables that always needs a lot of mental analysis before you feel comfortable interpreting it. But you're good. It's good to remind us of the heat maps as being pointers in many ways to what could be potential bad news. But that's good.
These are the sorry, Chair. These are the residual heat maps as well.
Risks after mitigation. Yeah. And I think, in fact, on that very point, Chris, it may be the title could be enhanced by a couple of words. Summary of risk ratings after mitigation.
I don't own this software, so it might it's controlled by the council. I can make the request. They might be able to change it, but it's not something I can do myself. I'll have to make that request. But I will.
I appreciate that. But I think for everybody reading it,
yes,
whichever services they are looking at,
absolutely,
it may instantly resolve a question in their minds.
It's a good point, and I'll raise it with the risk team at Powis. Yeah.
Right. Thanks. Gov 002. If we can scroll up to that.
Yep.
What I wrote down last night, you probably nailed already with the fact that the cash flow reports are going to committee, because I'd indicated, as a board, we received a 3-month retrospective report of income and expenditure. The question was, could we also be examining a forward-looking forecast over, say, either 12 months or even the 3 years of the actuarial period
Yes.
to get a bigger picture, because it's really useful if we do get some indication as to how the negative cash flows would be managed.
Yeah.
For sale of assets, once the buffer that is investment income in terms of dividends and interest it expires.
Yes, sorry, Butcher, you're a little bit muffled then, but I think the point you're trying to make is, can you have some forward-looking cash flows? The answer will be yes. Let me prepare or ask, because this is being prepared by Aon on our behalf. Let me see what I can get from Aon to share with you guys. But yes, absolutely, of course you can, no problem.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking down into my notes,
Yes,
Chris, so
it's okay.
I was a bit muffled in that respect. Sorry.
No, that's no problem.
And again, I raised the fact that 926,000 out in between January and March is substantial. But if that's in hand, that's absolutely fine.
Yep.
Gov 0015.
Just getting to it. There we are. Yes. Okay.
Which is about me and all of us.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say that I am quite reassured and indeed relieved that there are processes already in place to try and find a successor.
Yes.
But we do have the wider issue about membership of the board, and it is demanding on people's times. Everyone, whatever position they're in, will have busy diaries. And we still have one vacancy, don't we?
We have, well, Nigel leaving.
Yeah.
Obviously we'll have that vacancy, and we know that another employer representative is looking to try and step down as well. So actually, there's a newsletter going out to the employers in the next few days, which is raising the fact that we've got an opportunity to join the pension board and explaining all the positives that an employer representative can bring to the table as well. So we're trying again to try and push that one on. And I know that the Section 151 officer at Powys is looking for almost a like-for-like replacement in respect of Nigel's position as well. So yes, we are trying to move that on.
And will we be having the usual committee chairs meeting with the employers in December?
Yes. Yeah.
So that will be another opportunity for me to do. You or I or both of us to do a plea.
Yes.
People to put their hands up.
I'm hoping that we'll have appointed somebody before then to both of those positions, both Nigel's and the other one.
Yeah.
However, it is another opportunity for us to try again. Yeah. It has been difficult. Has been very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, other funds are beginning to look at where there's some form of reimbursement for the extra work that's done. Employer reps obviously often are given time.
Yeah.
But apart from the physical presence or the virtual presence at meetings, there is an awful lot of training to be undertaken. There's a lot of reading of complex papers. And I know some funds already have some form of reimbursement in place, and others are looking at it. It's not widespread yet.
Okay, thank you for the information. Yeah.
Okay, so that was a comment on that. Invest 001. And in effect, 03, bringing them together. And in a way, this was a little bit of feedback on some observations from the last committee meeting. And I think it's something that perhaps I can brief on in more detail later. And it potentially, there are some links to those two particular risks.
Yep. Essentially performance related risks. Yeah.
Performance related risks, yes. Okay. And climate change you've already covered, so we don't need to raise that one again. And David's talked about bonds.
Yes.
I think we will need a discussion at some stage as to how the board can be of best help now that we've gone right through the pillars.
Yeah.
So we can always ideally focus on something rather than just have a general discussion, which probably can't involve a deep dive because of time pressures.
And I think perhaps Invest 1 and 3 are perhaps a good starting point, aren't they, Chair? So yeah.
And that is where I'm coming together. That's exactly what I'm will be suggesting as a way forward, but it is subject to, I've asked for subject to consideration by others, including yourself, to whether it's appropriate or not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Anything else to be raised at this stage?
Nothing from me, Chair.
Okay, well, thanks for your contributions. The item on Pensions Partnership, pages 71 to 104. And I note that the minutes of the JGC on the 20th September were released yesterday.
They were. Had I had the opportunity, I would have included them as part of this pack. I wasn't able to, I'm afraid. So they'll be included in the next one. Yeah.
And I know we've got 34 pages here, so we really do need to be selective. So, Chris, if you could point out what you think are the key issues.
I hadn't intended to go through anything in any detail, Chair, to be honest. It was literally a case of information just to show you what was presented to the JGC as part of the JGC update. And to be honest, these papers, having looked through them, they're collated from the Joint Governance Committee papers and minutes that are presented on the Host Authority's website. So it's a handy summary of what's been going on at the pool level. I guess the big one that's happened recently is the launch of the Sustainable Active Equity Subfund, which the Powys Fund, in fact, all 8 funds in Wales are going to be making an allocation to. And this is essentially a subfund that was requested that's more in line with net zero ambitions and climate change responsible investment. So it's pleasing to see that one launched at the end of June, and the Powys Fund is making a fairly significant allocation into that as well, which is a positive step forward. So that was the main thing I just wanted to make board aware of, that new subfund has been launched, and the Powys Fund is making an allocation towards it with green incentives, essentially.
Right, thanks, Chris. I've got a handful of issues just to raise very briefly, but do colleagues have any other specifics they wish to raise? No? Okay. Look at page 73. I'm focusing on the risk register.
Yeah.
And how that works in practice. You know, the OW Officer Working Group.
Yes.
Full of acronyms, of course.
It is.
It's responsible for maintaining the risk register, reporting back any changes.
Yes.
Now, it's the link then between that group and the 8 funds, really, that I'm just looking for some assurances on that.
Yep.
Are all 8 funds represented on that?
I don't sit on that one because there's only one of me. But essentially, I'm relying on the expertise from the other participating funds. Okay. I don't know if it's made up of all 8 funds, but essentially there is a risk register subgroup, in the same way that there is a responsible investment subgroup and a private market subgroup, which is made up of officers, and I think that meets monthly. They will then work with Hymans, who are the advisors to the pool, to produce and monitor the risk register. They then present it to the officer working group, and the officer working group approve any changes or recommendations, which is then taken up to the Joint Governance Committee. So there's a 3-tiered approach to it, in exactly the same way as there is with the responsible investment subgroup feeding into the JGC.
So it's a standard process.
Yes.
And I think I was just looking for guarantees that any funds not represented on the OWG would be fully briefed on what was covered.
Absolutely, I have attended in the past. I have been on the risk register subgroup.
I thought you had.
And I've got an awful lot of confidence in the officers that sit on there, being very vocal and very considerate towards risk as well. So from my point of view, I'm not worried that I don't sit on it every time, because I can't, because I know that the people that are there are really, really good. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris, for that assurance. Page 84.
Which page is that one? It's 87. I've gone past it. Sorry, it's on the left now. There we are. Okay.
And it's purely, really, partly due to David's comments about bonds. And this is just the reassurances after, we're on the anniversary, I think, of the LDI crisis. It's just the reassurances shown there that there are no LDI investments, liability-driven investments in the WPP.
Yes.
It just takes a little bit. Sorry, worry. You actually see that it's restated.
Yes. Which is presented by the operator. This is the operator update. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to log that, really. That's the thinking. Page 91. Thing.
Yeah.
My notes indicate that the 21-22 report was submitted in October 22. So it's just asking about timescales for the 22-23 report.
This is a difficult one for me because it's not a document produced by me. Right. So I mean, it is all in hand as far as I'm aware. But for any actual confirmation on dates, I'd have to go back to WPP to say when you're submitting it. But I know they are submitting it, and as far as I'm aware, everything is on track. So
yeah, thank you. Page 94, which is the final point. I think it's worth the board sort of noting here the total costs of WPP that are basically being recharged to the 8 funds, and it's deducted from the net asset value.
Yes.
So it's just an awareness of what we're talking about. Obviously, forecast and budget are pretty damn close.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
So have you got any observations on that, Chris?
No, Chair. No observations, really. No. The system works and is appropriate. So yes, fine.
Okay. Okay. With no further questions, then I think the item chart required starting with the breaches register.
Sorry, Chair, you're a little bit muffled then again. I was
looking down.
Is it to look at the breaches register?
Breaches register, yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So there has been a slight tweak to the breach register in the form of an addition of a recordable breach. So this is really to make board aware of this. The first two are the same ones that you've seen for many years. In fact, I've touched on them previously, to do with the late notification of deferred benefits and frozen refunds that are not paid within the 5 years. However, board will be aware that we've been doing quite a bit of work on the employer side over recent months. And as a result of that work, we've identified there's another breach of legislation that's happened on occasion, and that's to do with the statutory requirement and timescales attached to employers submitting contributions and returns to the fund. There's a requirement within regulations that they have to do it within a certain time period, and the fund, as it happens, asks for it to be 19 days after the end of the previous month. So we are now actively monitoring that these contributions are received and when they're received, and then logging it whether it's in time or out of time. This was previously managed by the finance section, but we've now taken ownership of monitoring this within the pensions admin section, and that's one reason why we've been able to do this deeper dive into it. So ultimately, we've identified a couple of occasions where, or a few occasions where, some employers have not been hitting their statutory requirements. Therefore, it's our duty to record it as a breach of the legislation. And I've got some more detail behind this in a report later on in the agenda. So I guess it's really just to make board aware and question whether board are happy with that to be acknowledged as an appropriate breach. My feeling is that yes, it is. But it's over to you now, Chair, to pick up on that and see whether you feel that's appropriate.
Right, thank you, Chris. Yes, I am conscious that this is quite a hot potato in many other boards and funds, and I think we are now in the situation where we have, as it were, more reliable information,
yes,
which is always good, and therefore we can be consistent in how we interpret. At this stage, we are talking about recording breaches.
yes,
And it's very important to differentiate between recording and reporting to the regulator. And Code of Practice 14, which I've got over in the corner there, shows the 4 stages that have to be gone through before any reporting is done.
Yeah.
And again, that's more relevant to the next part of the agenda after once we go into private discussions.
Yes.
So I think we have made a big move forward, getting to this stage. And I think it was an important and necessary move forward, because individually we are all subject to the regulator. And from time to time, it does lead us to very much focus on that point. And I think this is a good example of that. So I don't think I need to add anything at this stage about this topic.
No, if board are comfortable with that going on to breaches register, then it will be taken to committee next week as well, because the breaches register forms part of the pack for
Yes.
their.
Yes. So we therefore need to clarify that we as board are indeed comfortable with that being on the breaches register. Are we okay on that? Anyone not comfortable?
My only comment, Chair, is that I have revised the wording slightly within the breaches description. There was a second version of this paper of this report which followed via email. I've just tweaked the wording slightly, so I'll recirculate that after the meeting. And if board are comfortable with that amended wording of the actual breach description, then that will be the version I'll take forward. If that's okay.
Because this is one where we, as board members, have our own responsibility. Quite explicitly.
Yeah.
And as I say, it does focus the mind. Okay, so Graham, sorry, Graham.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the obviously the 3 breaches reported, what is the requirement in terms of how far back do we need to go to continue recording breaches? So, for example, the first one on there, I'm just wondering, will that at some stage drop off, or does it continue to, because we're talking 2018-19 here, aren't we? So I'm just wondering whether it's for information or whether there's a continued relevance to that in terms of what's being reported here.
Yeah, do we keep it going for the next 10 or 20 years, for example? I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
I think it'll have to stay on there until or if the legislation changes, just simply by its nature. We're not able to pay this, therefore we breached. I think it was at a previous discussion, it was determined that it's not a reportable breach to the regulator at this stage, because there's nothing we can do about it because the regs don't allow us to change it. I was thinking exactly the same thing as I was working through the breaches register and thought, blimey, it's 5 years ago we identified these ones. Yeah, it's a valid point, but I'm not sure what we can do about it really.
No.
It's a fair shout, Graham. I'm aware in other places they're in exactly the same situation. I had some interchange correspondence with Chris recently about how it could be corrected on a national level and involving Scheme Advisory Board. I'm totally comfortable that that remains as it is, because in effect, the vast impact of it is beyond our control.
Yeah.
And until the legislation changes, if it does change, then it's a different type of issue for us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it will be more modern, as it were, and more marginal and incremental. But at the moment, it's just a blanket.
Yeah, it is. Unless the approach, we're taking the approach that's been suggested by the LGPS technical group, so a national group that meets with all sorts of bodies, and that's the approach. Unless that approach changes, which it might do, there could be a different view on it in a few years' time, and that would change how we record it and if we record it. So yeah, I'll have to keep you updated on whether things progress on that one.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for those discussions. We can now move on to the audit reports.
Yes, there are none. You've seen the previous one. There's one, I guess under item 12, there's only one update that I really want to make board aware of, and that's in respect of complaints, actually, which you briefly touched on before on IDRP. We had one complaint recently, which has been dealt with at stage 1 of the internal disputes resolution procedure, and that was to do with an overseas transfer, which took place 10 years ago. The scheme member came back through one of these companies to say, actually, a company represented the scheme member and approached us to say, we think you could have done more to stop this transfer out happening, despite the fact that the member had signed the form to say that they wished to transfer and whatnot. So they were questioning the governance process that was in place back in 2014. So we reviewed it, and at this stage it was dismissed at stage 1. So we're waiting to see now whether it comes back at stage 2. Again, this is not uncommon within the LGPS. This is in respect of the adverts you hear on the radios from time to time. Have you transferred out your pension benefits from a defined benefit pension scheme? Therefore, you could be eligible for X, Y, Z. This is a company essentially approaching us to say that they think we could have done more in the governance side of things. We were comfortable in the approach we took. And interestingly, this is quite a common thing within the LGPS. Just to let you know, we've had one and we've dealt with it at stage 1.
And there's no statute of limitations around any of this.
No.
Okay, thanks for that update, Chris. Any comments on that? I think every corporate body is subject to no win, no fee type.
Yeah.
Part of the life we're in these days. Okay. Basically, so that's item 12. Item 13, the next board meeting, 20th of November. And we're hoping that the chair of SAB will actually be here for that one. Some points on it. Therefore, if possible, if you can make it physically, as the chair of SAB will be, I think it would be good if you could. And obviously, with potentially two board places down. Obviously, we're a bit squeezed for making it quorate. So whether, in the light of that, in remaining 4 weeks, we can have a new employer from Powys County Council identified.
Yeah.
I certainly would be more than happy to do a fast track intro with the chair sort of session that I usually do, because it would be a bit of an own goal if we had to postpone that one.
Yeah. Section 151 officer, as I say, is we discussed it a few days ago, so she is well aware of the importance to try and get that one in place ASAP. So yeah, I'll keep you posted on that one, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the open session, and thanks to anyone outside who's been listening or watching. The board now needs to consider, in accordance in accordance with section 106 brackets 8 of the Local Government Pension Scheme Regs 2013, whether it goes into the confidential agenda with the public and press being excluded, as some of the information may relate to financial or business affairs of a particular person or organisation. So, colleagues, are we happy to pass that resolution? Yes. Yes, thank you very much. So I'll give Rachel a moment now to do the